Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, October 16th, 2025. We've got a little bit to talk about today with that recent meeting between Argentina's President Javier Milei and American President Donald Trump. But first, I want to talk about our vid chat. Tomorrow, it was supposed to have been at 5 p.m. U.S. Central Time in the evening, early evening, late afternoon. I have pushed it back to 1 p.m. U.S. Central Time because they are telling us we're going to have another threat of severe weather coming along Friday evening. So I hope I'm starting the vid chat early enough to get through everything by the time the storms arrive. I also have another announcement that I'll make to the VidChat folks tomorrow during the pre-chat and formal chat part of the presentation. All right. When I decided to do this news and views, I initially wanted to talk about the explosion of the ammo dump in Tennessee, because many of you were asking me what I thought about it. I can briefly summarize my reaction to it that I do think there is a remote possibility that it is part of that pattern that we saw about 10 years ago with various ammo dumps inside of Russia blowing up, and occasionally a Ukrainian ammo dump and so on and so forth. And we saw recently a German ammunition or munitions factory having some sort of issues. So I do think that there's a kind of covert war possibly going on. We would have to know more about the Tennessee strike, but it does seem to me to be a possibility. But that remotely is a possibility. That's more or less my take. I decided not to talk about that in much greater length today because there's been a bit of emerging detail, courtesy of one of our regular readers, LGLR, who provided the story. There's a bit of emerging detail about that summit meeting between Presidents Milei and Trump. And I want to talk about that because I think there's a long history and some very tricky maneuvering and politics going on in between the lines of this article that I want to advance as part of my high-octane speculative reading of what may be going on with these deals. We're learning now that there was indeed a deal struck between the two presidents. And I want to read a few paragraphs from this article. The article is titled, "The U.S. has stepped in with an extraordinary bailout of Argentina. Here's what it means." The article is by Mr. Jeff Cox, and it was published just 3 days ago. So this is a fairly recent article. I want to read just a few paragraphs from this article, from the very beginning, the middle, and then towards the middle end, and then I'll give you my very high-octane speculation on some of the possibilities that I think may be lurking in this story. So we'll begin at the beginning. Quote, "The Treasury Department has extended a financial lifeline to Argentina in apparent hopes of heading off an emerging market financial crisis that could spread to U.S. shores. In a move that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced Thursday on social media site X, the U.S. is providing a $20 billion currency swap line with Argentina's central bank, essentially exchanging stable U.S. dollars with volatile pesos," unquote. Now, folks, let that one settle in. We've been watching the steady erosion of the value of the dollar, and compared to the Argentinian peso, it's stable. That ought to tell you what a rickety system that we're dealing with is here, and that ought to raise the suspicion meter of this deal into the red zone. So let me skip a couple of paragraphs and read a bit more. Quote, there are equal parts economic and political stakes with the venture, which marks the first U.S. intervention of this nature since rescuing Mexico in 1995. While Argentina poses little systemic risk, it can still matter in terms of possible capital flight, along with volatility in debt and commodity markets. That chance was deemed worth the risk of potential Argentinian default, unquote. Now, you might remember several years ago, the then Argentine President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner gave a speech in front of the UN General Assembly, and it was quite fiery. I even commented on that speech with the then Georgianne Hughes on her radio show. It was quite a fiery speech, but in it she clearly laid much of the blame for Argentina's woes, not simply on Argentina's endless experiment with socialism of one Peronist variety or another, but also at the feet of the West, and particularly the United States and the various hedge funds and bankers that had extended such easy credit and basically created an addict. It was quite a fiery speech. If you don't remember it, it might behoove you to go watch it, because she laid out in very clear terms what some of the problems facing Argentina were, and those problems ultimately led to the election of Mr. Milei. Now, continuing toward the end of this article, listen carefully and closely. Quote, in addition to economic and market matters, the U.S. has a significant political stake in what's happening in Argentina. The October 26th elections will determine the fate of President Javier Milei's government, which has become an important ally for the U.S. in the region. Remember, one of the first things that President Milei did was he put on hold the developing relationship between Argentina and communist China, which had been making significant inroads into Latin America via Argentina. And the next thing he did, of course, was he put an end to a lot of the bloated social programs in Argentina. Continuing. With investors jittery over global growth and election year uncertainty, the bailout shows Washington is committed to keeping credit markets calm at home. In his announcement of the deal, now, the question there is, credit markets at home where? Does that mean at home in the United States? Or does it mean at home in Argentina? Or does it mean at home in both countries? And my argument, when you listen to my high-octane speculation as to what I think might be going on in the background here, I think you'll have to agree that it's making the credit markets, both in the United States and in Argentina, stable and calm. Quote, in his announcement of the deal, Bessent said it was in response to, quote, a moment of acute illiquidity, unquote, and said the U.S. was in a unique position to help. He further mentioned the country's efforts at fiscal reform that will, quote, generate significant dollar-denominated exports and foreign exchange reserves, unquote. And that one statement, I submit to you, gives the whole game away. This is about keeping Argentina firmly within the Western financial orbit and out of the BRICS orbit. That's what it's about. So again, let's recall that under Fernandez de Kirchner, Argentina was moving very quickly, and she herself at that time came out and said, well, Argentina would want to explore the options of becoming a member of BRICS. So, in other words, the significant South American economy, and let's also remember a significantly technologically advanced country in Latin America, let's remember that Argentina's nuclear power provides electricity for many, if not most, of the other Latin American countries, all the way up to and including Mexico. So, in other words, Argentina is a key pin or a keystone in the arch of Latin American economic and technological power. And this is the reason Argentina was so high on China's list of nations to target for membership in the BRICS Association. But you'll notice the other thing that's going on here. It looks to me as if the United States is playing a very subtle variation on the BRICS game of creating bilateral currency agreements, let's say between Iran and China, which we saw, or Iran and India, which we've also seen, where the two countries involved in these currency swaps agree to trade directly with each other in their own currencies, bypassing the U.S. dollar. Now, we've also seen or heard the stories of the increasing pressure on the U.S. dollar, and I've been arguing for some time that what the BRICS are attempting to do, and probably we will see this phase emerge eventually, is you're going to start to see the emergence of regional reserve currencies. And I strongly suspect this will probably start in the BRICS nations. We're already seeing China, through a series of these types of arrangements, negotiating in such a way that it positions the renminbi as a more or less reserve regional currency. By the way, Japan, if you recall, concluded an agreement with India where both nations would support each other's militaries logistically if they either one came under attack. Now, we can bet our bottom dollar that the clearing for such logistical support is probably not denominated in dollars. We can bet that this will probably be yet another, although very covert, agreement between India and Japan to trade directly in rupees and yen and bypass the dollar. So what this looks like to me is the United States is playing more or less the same game, but with a different purpose, and that is to keep Argentina firmly on the U.S. dollar and using the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. This is the key part of that sentence about Argentina generating significant exports in U.S. dollar denominations. That's the game. So this is all about kicking out China, keeping Argentina firmly on the BRICS reservation, and firmly committed to a U.S. dollar reservation. Now, whether this will prove successful in the long term remains to be seen. It might, and I underlined this speculation and the extreme nature of it very, very, very strongly. This might be a presage of a strategy that you might begin to see the United States use vis-a-vis other countries. So I suspect we're looking at the beginning of a process here, not the end of it. But Argentina is a significant beta test case, because if we can make this work with an economy and a technological infrastructure that large and that sophisticated, then making it work for lesser countries is going to be all that much easier. So this may be one to watch over the long term. America is, for the moment, forestalling the development of BRICS associations in Latin America. We have counter-moved Argentina to Brazil's joining the BRICS. And for the moment stalemated any further Latin American expansion of that association. So this may be one to watch very, very closely. If this reading is indeed true, then it also betokens the fact that Mr. Milei, when he had his summit meeting with Mr. Trump, was playing some pretty sophisticated hardball. Because we can be fairly certain that one of the pressure points he may have used and presented to Mr. Trump is, if you don't help us, then inevitably Argentina will have to turn to China to help with the bailout. So this is going to be one to watch, folks. Don't forget, get your questions and comments in by 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time tonight for the vid chat tomorrow. The vid chat has been moved to 1 o'clock U.S. Central Time. As always, I'll be in there early to make sure that everything is up and running. If by any chance I'm not in there, then I've had some sort of technical issue crop up. But I'm not anticipating that. Anyway, we'll see you on the flip side, everybody. Bye-bye, and God bless.